Greetings, fellow gamers. So, this is the next installment of the Timeless or Time to Go video series, talking about various classic sci-fi books and whether they do belong to the notorious group of classic works of fiction. Today we are going to be talking about three more works of classic sci-fi. I don't know if any of these technically count as, well, they kind of do. One of them does. They're all kind of adjacent to science fiction, but they were all on the various lists that I found when I did my research before starting this series, so I'm not going back on it now. So, we are talking today about Frankenstein by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Apparently that's her middle name, I learned that recently. We have George Orwell's 1984, of course, and Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. So we're going to start off with Frankenstein, of course. Now, Frankenstein and Mary Shelley are widely credited with the creation of the science fiction genre. I don't know if that's accurate, but this is one of the earliest and most prominent works of science fiction. It's probably more accurately referred to as Gothic horror rather than science fiction, because when you read it you realise there's actually hardly any science involved, even though the main character is a scientist and so on, but we will get into that. First things first, this is Diana's copy of Frankenstein that she gave to me, and it's awful. Look at that. Look at the copy and pasted birds they've got there in dreadfully low resolution. I never want to read this particular copy of this book ever again, and if I'm being completely honest, I could do without reading Frankenstein itself ever again. It's a product of its time. It was written in like 1816. Yes. Oh wow, I got that right first time. Yeah, written at 1816. This is a rather regretful 2015 copy, apparently, from Jefferson Publication, of which I've never heard, so that can go away. But yeah, let's get into this. Now, this book, since it was written in the 19th century, it has a similar writing style to works like War of the Worlds and 20,000 Leagues. If you've seen my previous videos on this series, you'll know that I actually DNF'd both of them. So, not boding too well, but you know what? I forced myself to finish Frankenstein because Diana and I were reading it together. She had to listen to it on audiobook. And I'm almost wishing I'd done the same thing, so I could have kind of glazed over and not 100% paid attention. But anyway, all of these books feel like the authors were just using a thesaurus for every single word. I don't know what that says about the state of the modern education system. I don't know if... Did they even have thesauruses back then? Diana, you can look that up. Editor Diana, did they have thesauruses back then that the authors were all just using for every word? Or are we just very stupid in this generation? So the book begins with a series of 4 letters written from the POV of a different character who is meeting Victor Frankenstein for the first time, who is, of course, the Doctor, not the monster. Pretty sure everyone knows that now, but I figured I'd clarify anyway. There are stupid people out there. So yeah, Dr. Frankenstein is met in the northern Arctic Circle in Russia, picked up by a ship that's trapped in some ice, and he is practically on death's door at the time. But then the book time jumps straight back to the beginning of Frankenstein's childhood because, of course, we have to go through the entire life story before we get to anything of any interest. But yeah, eventually, Dr. Frankenstein becomes interested in science, he studies chemistry, and he eventually stumbles upon the procedure that allows him to bring things to life, to animate things. And he decides to use that skill to bring to life a human creature. The process by which he figures out how to do this is completely skipped over in the book, and Mary Shelley explains this away by saying that the POV character would not wish to bestow the horrors of how to bring things to life like that. So I'm protecting you by not telling you. And that's the end of that. I haven't seen for myself any of the original Frankenstein films, but as we all know, Frankenstein has been immortalized in plenty of other works, and I think he's brought to life because Dr. Frankenstein harnesses the power of a lightning strike, and that's why Frankenstein is often portrayed as having bolts in his neck, because that's where like the wires are clamped on to bring him to life. None of that happens in the book. In fact, the Frankenstein's monster is hardly ever referred to as a monster in this book, and looks nothing like any of the modern depictions of Frankenstein. So, Frankenstein's most well-known depiction is from the 1930s movie, where it's a black and white film, but we now know that his skin is typically depicted as being green. He also has like slicked back 1930s mobster style hair that's quite short. There are bolts in his neck, as I said, and he's tall, but not freakishly tall. Turns out that in the original book, every single one of those is different. His skin is described as being yellow, as are his eyes. He doesn't have bolts in his neck because he's not brought to life by lightning, as far as we know. He's actually 8 feet tall because Dr. Frankenstein had to make him bigger, so all the tiny little parts would be easier to work on, apparently. And he has long, lustrous black hair. So yeah, he looks pretty terrifying. If you've seen any of the like the plays that he's been shown in from the 1800s, or any like paintings and stuff, they're a lot more accurate to how he's shown in the book, and it's pretty terrifying. But yeah, he is generally accepted as being brought to life by being put together from various parts, presumably of dead people, which is kind of terrifying, and he looks awful. He's not referred to as a monster, he's referred to, well, he is a couple of times called a monster in the book, but he's mostly referred to as a wretch or a creature. So Dr. Frankenstein brings him to life, is immediately terrified. Like, could you imagine? You spent weeks and weeks putting together a creature from dead bodies, bring it to life, and then all of a sudden are shocked and horrified that the thing you were trying to do has just happened, and your creature made of dead bodies is alive. Who could have seen this coming? Yes, the creature is now alive, and Frankenstein is terrified about that, so he runs away back to his bedroom and goes to sleep, because that's what you do when you've just created a monster that's 8 feet tall and it's starting to come to life in your own house. You run to your bedroom and hide under the covers and go to sleep. But anyway, he wakes up sometime later on, and the monster is gone, and he thinks, oh, thank goodness, the abomination I created has now disappeared. I don't know where it is. It could be anywhere. It could do anything, but it's gone, so not my problem anymore. And he continues living his life, and then various other things happen. I won't spoil the entire book. We switch to the monster's POV for quite a while to see how he deals with suddenly existing in a world where he looks like a monster, is attacked on sight by any other people he finds, and yeah, it gets very philosophical as to how the monster feels about other people and about the person who created him, and then they eventually meet each other again, and a lot of other interesting stuff happens. But unfortunately, despite all of the wordiness of this book, there is basically no real plot that happens at all. Things happen and words are said, but it doesn't really feel like the book kind of goes anywhere in that sense. There's hardly any description of settings or events that take place, so it kind of just feels like paragraph after paragraph of not a lot. That's what made this book so difficult to get through. But then purely for the creation of science fiction / gothic horror and all of the philosophical discussions over how a creature like Frankenstein's monster would feel and exist has then inspired so many other works afterwards that I couldn't give this book anything less than 3 stars. Definitely worth reading, but not the kind of thing that I would be interested in picking up and rereading for purely for recreation. I'm glad I read it though, but yeah. I don't even want to look at this copy again. I mean, just look at it. I know I showed you, but it's terrible. If I had a proper copy of this book, I might have felt better about reading it. But you see the difference that having a terrible copy of a book makes when it comes toward whether you want to read it or reread it or anything like that. Anyway, that's Frankenstein. Our next book is quite the opposite. Just look at how cool. Oh god, look at how cool this edition of 1984 is. Very, very pretty. Now, this is of course 1984 by George Orwell. I had never read this book before. I think it's a film that I've also never seen. But yeah, I didn't even know that 1984 referred to the year that it was set in. Didn't know that. Now, this book was written in 1949, right after the end of World War II. It appears to be mostly a criticism of capitalism and communism altogether. I don't know if this book has ever actually been banned in any countries, but I've heard that it's been criticized. It was criticized at the time by America for being pro-communist, and then criticized by the Soviet Union for being anti-communist, something like that. I don't know. I don't even know if that's true. But anyway, this was actually a really good read. Definitely something I think that everyone should read. So this is set, like I said, in 1984, following a huge revolution that took place about 40 years prior. It's set in the UK, which is now under the continent of Oceania, which is actually where Australia and New Zealand are, but apparently instead it contains those and North America and the UK. And then there are 2 other megacontinents, and they're all at war with each other and so on. But the government is now set up on the idea of Ingsoc, which is the new speak, or the new language that they have for English socialism. One interesting thing about this book is it takes a completely opposite idea of sex and relationships when compared to the book Brave New World, which was written not that long before this book, in 1932. So in that book, which I've already reviewed, sex and promiscuity are encouraged to try to keep the population happy. But in 1984, sex is completely abhorred and discouraged, and that's because it can invoke feelings and thoughts that the state can't control. Now, thought control is pretty much the main theme of this new government. Popularized the term Big Brother, which is this propaganda character that is supposed to be the prophet of this new political party. It was definitely a breath of fresh air to read this book in a modern writing style compared to all the 19th century stuff I was reading before. But there are, the characters are actually interesting, and there is an actual plot in this book for once. I had no idea that was too much to ask for, apparently. It's a very, very compelling political dystopia. This is much more on the social sciences side of sci-fi, because again, there's no real science involved, but it's very very political, of course, and for that reason more on the social sciences aspect. But despite the heavy political focus of this book, of which I initially didn't take that much interest in, I don't know a lot about politics, to be honest. And well, considering the politically rough times that we're in at the moment, I thought it was definitely the right time to queue up on a book like this. But it was also an interesting take on the cultural zeitgeist, I think is the correct term, but I could be completely wrong. An interesting take on what was going on in the minds of people in the late 1940s, right after the war. I'm not going to spoil the book again. I do think it's entirely worth reading. The final quarter of the story definitely gets a bit lost in some symbolism, especially the very final chapter, because it's not clear. Like, a character is sitting in a cafe, but they're also about to be shot in prison, but they're still in the cafe. So it's like one of those is some kind of symbolic vision that they're having, and I don't even know which it is. But this is definitely, in my opinion, an all-time fictional classic, and I think everyone should read this book. It's full of interesting ideas to do with politics, free will, and all that kind of stuff that I think everyone should be more aware of in the day-to-day. But yeah, I gave this book 4 stars. I think the kind of heavy symbolism brought it down a tiny bit at the end. But yeah, really, really good. Not the sort of book that you would read for fun. It's a little bit too serious for that. I think that's the thing that stops it from being a 5-star book, because you want to have fun when you're reading, not have some kind of political wake-up call. Now, as you'll know if you have seen some of the previous videos in this series, most of these books the copies that I have for this series most of them are used. This is one of the new copies that we got in a Waterstones. This is a fairly recent copy of Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I'm only mentioning this because when I got it, I wasn't that happy with the cover. I thought it looked just a little cartoony and not that good. But it has grown on me. I really like the color scheme, all the reds and stuff. It's very autumn coded, and as we're getting into autumn soon now, it was definitely a good time to read this book. Fahrenheit 451. This book is named after apparently the temperature, 451 degrees Fahrenheit, at which book paper starts to burn. Because this book is all about a post-apocalyptic kind of world where firemen don't put out fires because houses are fireproof now. They come around and burn books because books are not allowed anymore, apparently. Now, this book was shorter than 1984. It read a lot quicker. Again, interestingly, it was only written 4 years after 1984, being written in 1953. Another sort of post-war commentary. Very much likely influenced by the book-burning practices of Germany during World War II. I'm not exactly sure what kind of books they burnt, but I just know that they did. And this is all about book burning. I'm saying very obvious things. I'm struggling to think of things to say. Anyway, the two quite different visions of dystopia, but both centered around control, censorship, free will, and so on. This book, the style was a lot more poetic in its writing than 1984. A lot of symbolism and emotive language being used, a lot of metaphors, varying sentence structure, which was a little bit jarring to begin with, but I got used to it. It's a much more kind of eloquently written book without losing itself in too much poetry to lose all meaning. But still very much readable. All of this kind of metaphorical writing stuff was nowhere near as extreme as I have seen it before, particularly in the book Neuromancer, which I tried to read and DNF'd a couple chapters in months ago. That would have been a book as part of this series if I hadn't already tried to read it before the series began. Neuromancer was just intelligible, but this is, poetic, but still readable. Up to about halfway through the book, not a lot seems to be happening. It's about this guy who's a fireman who burns books, but it turns out he's actually been stockpiling books in his own house, and that's very, very naughty. That's not allowed. And then bad things happen. This recording session is lasting quite a while. I just completely filled my phone up with storage and had to delete a lot of photos. Not the best timing for that to happen. But anyway, on with the video. So this guy, his name is Guy. Very inventive, I know. He's storing books in his house, even though that's illegal. He's going to get in trouble. He has a wife who doesn't like him, and I don't think he likes her either. And eventually she completely betrays him and reports him to his own firehouse for owning some books. Oh yeah, so his wife is basically obsessed with using this wall-to-wall TV system in their living room, in which 3 walls of the room are full screens that are used to interact with these random characters that she doesn't know, but she's programmed them to act like her family, and she genuinely loves them. Not sure what that's meant to be a commentary on, but it sounds depressing. Then the guy called Guy meets an old man who agrees to help him protect and preserve the books he's found, and even agrees to try to locate a printing press to make copies of them. But eventually his wife rats him out and forces him to burn... He's forced by his own firehouse captain to burn his own house down, which is pretty crazy. And then he goes on the run and various other stuff happens. But eventually it has a kind of happy ending. In a post-apocalyptic, depressing way. It's about the happiest ending you could ask for. But yeah, another interesting read, a good commentary on society and free will and so on. Definitely worth reading. A slightly quicker and easier read than 1984. A bit less heavy on the politics and political theory and stuff, but it did get a little bit too poetic for my tastes at certain times. Having said that, I gave it 4.5 stars. This was a good book. Not too depressing. I could actually pick this up and read it again, because the kind of poetry and description of this book is something that I personally really enjoy in the writing styles that I read a lot of. So yeah, that is the entirety of Group 5, even though this is the 3rd group that I've reviewed so far out of a possible 6. We're only halfway through this series. I don't even know how long it's been going on for, but we are only halfway in. So, in case you weren't paying attention, in order... In the number 1 spot for this group, we have Fahrenheit 451, followed pretty closely by 1984, followed by Frankenstein. It's over there somewhere. I threw it away. Next up, we are skipping back to Group 1 at the beginning. Like I said, I'm already partway through reading this group, which contains The Day of the Triffids, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Personally, I think this next group is going to be pretty S tier. I've really enjoyed The Day of the Triffids, and I'm halfway through 2001, and that's looking pretty good so far. So, stick around for the next episode of this series. I think the next video is going to be a pretty good one. and it shouldn't be too long before that comes out because, like I said, I'm halfway through reading those books. So that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around. Even though I'm pretty disorientated in this video, I'm tired. But yeah, get rid of that hairline. So that is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao.